Why she started noticing you when you stopped trying, there is a moment most men will recognize even if they have never heard it described clearly. You have been trying. Genuinely, earnestly, consistently trying. You have been available. You have been present. You have been patient and attentive and giving every signal that you are interested and serious and worth paying attention to. And somehow the more you give, the less she seems to notice. Not because she is cruel, not because you are doing something technically wrong, but because something in the dynamic has produced a result that is the exact opposite of what you intended. Your effort became background noise. My name is Mr. Wesley. And today we are talking about something that most men figure out too late, and most content addresses in entirely the wrong way. What actually happens when a man stops chasing what has not chosen him? What changes in how he sees himself? What changes in how the world responds to him? And why the version of himself that emerges on the other side of that decision is fundamentally more attractive than any amount of strategic effort could have produced. This is not about manipulation tactics. This is not about disappearing to make her jealous or timing your re-emergence for psychological impact. This is about what happens when a man chooses his own life over the pursuit of someone who has not chosen him, and why that choice changes everything. Let me start with the painful truth most men are not told clearly enough. When a man makes his attention unlimited, when his time and energy and presence are available without cost or conditions, something happens to the value of what he is offering that no amount of genuine quality can overcome. It becomes invisible. Not because he is insufficient, not because what he offers is not real or worth having, but because human beings are wired to notice what is rare and filter out what is constant. We pay attention to contrast. We ignore what is always there. Think about the air you breathe. It is essential. It is genuinely necessary for your survival, but you do not think about it. You do not appreciate it in the moment. You only notice it when it is suddenly not available. A man whose attention is always available becomes air, necessary in theory, invisible in practice, and the harder he works to make himself noticed, the more he texts, the more he shows up, the more he adjusts himself to what he thinks she wants, the more he confirms something she is already beginning to sense, that he does not believe his own presence is enough, that he is trying to compensate with effort for something he should simply carry as reality. And that lack of internal conviction communicates itself louder than any text or gesture or attempt at connection ever could. Here is what nobody tells you about what actually creates genuine attraction. It is not technique. It is not timing. It is not the strategic withdrawal of attention designed to manufacture emotional response. It is a man who has something worth leaving for. A man who has a life that genuinely matters to him, work he is building with real focus, relationships that nourish him, a discipline and a direction that exist completely independent of whether any particular woman is interested in him. When a man has that, when his life has genuine substance and momentum that was never contingent on female attention to begin with, something changes in how he moves through the world that no amount of technique can replicate. He stops being desperate, not because he trained himself to appear less desperate, but because the source of what was making him desperate, the belief that her attention was what his life was missing, dissolves when the life itself becomes full enough, and that fullness is visible. It radiates in how he carries himself, in how he speaks, in what he does and does not need from any given interaction. A man who is genuinely living his own life does not need to manufacture scarcity. His time is genuinely scarce because he is genuinely using it for things that matter to him. He does not need to strategically delay his responses. His responses are natural because he is genuinely engaged in other things when the message arrives. He does not need to create the impression of options. His life already contains people and pursuits and meaning that would exist whether she was interested in him or not. Let me describe what actually happens when a man redirects this energy. The man who was pouring himself into someone who had not chosen him, who was showing up consistently into a dynamic that was not returning what he was investing, eventually reaches a decision point, not always a dramatic one, sometimes just a quiet moment of clarity. I have been giving my best hours and my best energy to something that is not building anything. And the version of myself that I am becoming in this pursuit is not the version I want to be. So he redirects. He takes the time he was spending trying to be noticed and puts it back into his work, his health, the friendships that actually see him and invest in return, the projects he had been postponing because the emotional bandwidth required to maintain the pursuit had been consuming everything available, and something happens that he did not entirely anticipate. He starts becoming more himself, not the edited, cautious version of himself that was constantly monitoring how he was being received, the actual version, the one with opinions and direction and preferences and the specific quality of presence that belongs to a man who is not performing for anyone. That version is genuinely more attractive than anything the pursuit could have produced. Not because he engineered it, because it is real. Now let me name the specific things that change when a man redirects his energy back into his own life. The first thing that changes is his relationship with time. When a man is in active pursuit of someone who has not chosen him, his time has a quality of waiting to it. Every hour is implicitly organized around whether she will respond, whether she will be available, whether the opportunity he is waiting for will arrive. When he redirects that energy, his time becomes his own again, and time that belongs entirely to you has a completely different texture. It is productive in ways that waiting never is. It builds things that waiting never could. The second thing that changes is his standard. A man who is not pursuing anyone in particular has no reason to lower his standard. He is not adjusting himself to fit someone else's apparent preferences. He is not editing his opinions to be more agreeable or softening his convictions to be more palatable. He simply is who he is, at full expression, without the subtle distortion that pursuit introduces. And that undistorted version of himself is the most attractive thing he has to offer any person he encounters. The third thing that changes is what he is building. The man in active pursuit is not primarily building anything. He is primarily managing a dynamic. And management of a dynamic that is not reciprocating is an enormous energetic cost with no return. The man who redirected is building his health, his career, his financial foundation, the relationships that genuinely matter to him, the version of himself that he will still be proud of regardless of how any particular romantic interest resolves. That building is visible. It produces a man who is genuinely moving forward rather than standing still waiting for something external to change. The fourth thing that changes is his relationship with himself. This is the most important one and the least often discussed. A man who pursues someone who has not chosen him is implicitly communicating something to himself every time he continues. He is communicating that her choosing him matters more than his own direction, that her attention is worth more than his time, that waiting for her is more valuable than building without her. Over time, that communication accumulates. It shapes how he sees himself in ways that go well beyond any single romantic dynamic. When he redirects, when he chooses his own life over the pursuit of her validation, he communicates something different to himself, something that builds rather than erodes. He communicates that his direction matters, that his time has value, that his life is worth investing in regardless of whether any particular person is paying attention. And that internal shift is the foundation of everything else that follows. Now let me speak to what actually happens to her perception when a man genuinely redirects, not because that should be the goal, but because it is a real phenomenon worth understanding. When a man who was consistently present suddenly becomes genuinely absent, not strategically absent, but actually absorbed in his own life, something happens in the awareness of the person who was taking his presence for granted. They notice the absence. Not dramatically, not immediately, But the space where something used to be present becomes perceptible in a way that presence never was, and that noticing produces a different quality of thought than anything the pursuit ever generated. The pursuit produced a sense of being chased. Being chased is comfortable. It requires nothing. It can be indefinitely sustained without any investment from the person being pursued. The absence produces a question. What is he doing? Who is he becoming? Why does this feel different from what I expected? Questions are not comfortable. Questions require engagement, and engagement is the beginning of genuine attention rather than the passive reception of someone else's effort. This is not manipulation. This is simply what happens when the dynamic changes because the man changed. Not tactically. Actually, a man who is genuinely living his own life is genuinely more interesting than a man who is primarily interested in her. Not because of psychology, because he has something happening that is worth being interested in. Let me be clear about what this video is and is not saying. It is not saying disappear to make her jealous. It is not saying post pictures with other women to trigger her insecurity. It is not saying time your responses strategically to engineer emotional response. All of those things are manipulation, and manipulation, even when it produces short-term results, produces the wrong kind of relationship. A relationship built on manufactured dynamics rather than genuine connection. And manufactured dynamics require maintenance that becomes increasingly exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. What this video is saying is something simpler and more important. Your life deserves your primary investment, not as a tactic to make someone else notice you, but because your life is genuinely worth investing in. Because the version of yourself that emerges when you pour your best hours into your own growth and direction and purpose is genuinely better than the version that emerges from pouring those hours into the pursuit of someone who has not chosen you. And that better version of you, the one who is genuinely building something, who moves through the world with direction and substance and the quiet confidence of a man who knows what he is doing and why. That man does not need to engineer attraction. He produces it, naturally, as a byproduct of being genuinely alive in his own life. Here is what I want to leave you with. The question is never, how do I make her miss me? The question is, am I living a life worth missing? Am I building something genuine? Am I becoming someone I respect? Am I investing my best hours in the things that will still matter to me in 10 years, regardless of how any particular romantic dynamic resolved? If the answer to those questions is yes, if your life has genuine substance and direction and meaning that is not contingent on any one person's attention, then everything else takes care of itself. The right person will notice, not because you manufactured her noticing, but because you became someone genuinely worth noticing. And that is the only version of this outcome that is actually worth having. If this spoke to something in you today, share it. Drop a comment below. What did you start building when you stopped chasing what was not choosing you? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one. This is Mr. Wesley.